Mr. President and Senator Merkley, I would ask consent for us to engage in a colloquy here as following my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
And Senator Merkley, I couldn't agree more with what you pointed out here. I mean, a lot of discussion, especially on that chart you talked about, that we've done this before. When the Senate hits a roadblock, we can come back to our majority powers and get through the roadblock and continue to do business as a Senate and do the business that we were sent here to do. And as you noted, I remember I called for rules reform 4 years ago, and I said the Senate was a graveyard for good ideas. I remember talking about that in my campaign and coming here, and I'm sorry to say that little has changed, that the digging continues. Americans are tired, I believe, with the gridlock and the dysfunction in Washington, filibusters, shutdowns, hyper-partisan attacks. Americans want reform in the way their government operates. More cooperation, more transparency, less partisanship, more problem solving. Monday's vote was one more example of why we need reform. Judge Robert Wilkins, well qualified to serve on the Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. He deserved an up or down vote. Instead, what did we get? Another filibuster. He's the fourth nominee to that court to be trampled on by the minority, not because he is unqualified, not because any failing on his part, but because a Democratic president nominated him. For some, that is enough. That is all it takes to tell an eminent American to go home. First, it was Caitlin Halligan in March, then Patricia Millett last month, followed by Nina Pillard last week, and now Robert Wilkins. Each of them exceptional. Every one of them distinguished nominees. Each would be a credit to the Court of Appeals. So the number 4 and counting. In baseball, 3 strikes and you are out. Not so in the Senate. But this isn't just about the rules. It's about having a Senate that works, not one that buckles under the weight of filibusters. The partisan games continue, and the game has gone on long enough because the losers are the American people. Senators Merkley and Harkin and I have proposed changes to the rules at the beginning of this Congress. Rules changes that were fair. They reined in the abuse. They protected the minority. We were very clear. We called for a talking filibuster. We argued that if the minority wants to continue debate, which is what voting against cloture is, they should actually have to stand on the floor and debate. Come down here if you want to slow things down, and get on the floor and debate. Instead, a compromise was reached. The two leaders agreed to work together to schedule votes on nominees in a timely manner by unanimous consent, except in extraordinary circumstances. That was the standard in the test, extraordinary circumstances. The minority leader said the subject of nominations, Senate Republicans will continue to work with the majority to process nominations consistent with the norms and traditions of the Senate. That was the agreement, and we all know it has not been kept. In July, we had another shutdown on confirmations. All qualified candidates, all prepared to serve, but nominated by a Democratic president, or asked to lead agencies the other side doesn't like. The Department of Labor, the EPA, the Consumer Protection Bureau, all blocked. Once again, we looked at changing the rules with a simple majority to restore the Senate's ability to function. We had a historic meeting in the old Senate chamber, and we reached another compromise. I was hopeful for the outcome. There was feeling on both sides that things had to change, that we needed to change the way we do business here, and we confirmed several of those nominees. But here we are again, back on the filibuster merry-go-round and getting nowhere. 4 months later, the same debate, the same partisan games, with qualified nominees denied an up or down vote. And not just judicial nominees, but also Congressman Mel Watt, blocked from leading the Federal Housing Finance Agency. The only extraordinary circumstance has been continual obstruction. This is not the norms and traditions of the Senate. It's the failure of partisan politics. In fact, it wasn't long ago that Republicans were the first to say so. During the Bush administration, they were up in arms. Why? Because 10 judicial nominations had been blocked. 10, mind you. That number seems quaint now, but it was enough for the Republicans. Here's what the Republican Policy Committee said in 2005. These are their words. This breakdown in Senate norms is profound. There is now a risk that the Senate is creating a new 60-vote confirmation standard. The Constitution plainly requires no more than a majority vote to confirm. Exercising the constitutional option in response to judicial nomination filibusters would restore the Senate to its long-standing norms and practices governing judicial nominations and guarantee that a minority does not transform the fundamental nature of the Senate's advice and consent responsibility. This approach, therefore, would be both reactive and restorative. Restore the Senate to its long-standing norms and practices. It would be difficult to state the case more clearly. One of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle said we should be careful what we wish for, that the majority rule could backfire. We might get more Justice Scalias. Well, that is exactly the point. The Constitution does not give me the right to block a qualified nominee, no matter who is in the White House. The real norms and traditions of the Senate honor that principle. Some of us may disagree with Justice Scalia on judicial philosophy, but he was a qualified nominee, he received an up or down vote, and he was unanimously confirmed. Likewise, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was considered liberal, the former ACLU general counsel. Many on the other side may have disagreed with her views, but there was no filibuster. She was confirmed by a vote of 96-3. A minority in the Senate should not be able to block qualified nominees. On the other side of the aisle, this is not advice and consent. It is obstruct and delay. The people elect a president. They give him or her the right to select a team to govern and to appoint judges to the federal bench. If those nominees are qualified, they deserve an up or down vote. That is how our democracy is intended to work. That is the mandate of our Constitution. That is the real tradition of the Senate, and that's the way it's supposed to work, and has worked that way in the past. My father was Secretary of Interior for President Kennedy. He later told me when I asked him how long it took to get his team in place at Interior, he said, "Tom, I had virtually my whole team in place in the first 2 weeks." In place, ready to serve the American people in 2 weeks. The President's team, his team to choose so long as they're qualified to do the job. My colleague on the other side is right. The winds can change, and let's be candid. Neither side is 100% pure. Both sides have had their moments of obstruction and no doubt their reasons at the time. But I don't think the American people care much about that. They don't want a history lesson or a lesson in parliamentary procedure. They want a government that is fair. They want a government that is reasonable and that works for them. So, Senator Merkley, we're back at this situation now where we started as we came into the Senate in 2008 and saw a broken Senate and a Senate that wasn't responding to the American people. And the thing that I wanted to ask you about, because to me it's one of the troublesome parts of what's happening with these judges. The last 4 judges who have been filibustered have been women. And we're talking here about, I think, a different standard, because in between the 4, a man got onto the same court, was voted in. But 4 women have been held up in filibusters: Caitlin Halligan, Patricia Millett, Nina Pillard, and so we have over and over again this kind of obstruction. And do you think we have a double standard? Is it one, when you look at what's happened here recently with the Court of Appeals, a man gets on, 3 women get denied?
To my colleague from New Mexico, I would say it's been very disturbing to see these very capable women whom you have mentioned not be able to get an up and down vote. And indeed, our chair of Judiciary Committee, Senator Leahy, held a press conference to make this very concern known, that it seemed like that you have one process for a man and a different process for women. I'm going to defer to his judgment on that because I haven't been part of the Judiciary Committee, and I would like to think that in this day and age, there is not that sort of gender bias. That's what I would like to think. But I will let Senator Leahy commentary and his concerns in that area speak for themselves. It is clear, though, that fundamentally the situation is this. These women were highly qualified. They did not get up and down votes. Now, I have in my hand here a memo from April 25th, 2005. It's titled, "The Senate's Power to Make Procedural Rules by Majority Vote," and it consists of arguments made by the Republican majority in 2005 that nominees should get up and down votes for the judiciary. And there's many quotes from colleagues who still serve in this body who said in 2005 that regardless if they were in the majority or the minority, that they felt nominees deserved this up or down vote, that the Constitution demanded it, that the balance of powers between the branches demanded it. And I would ask my colleague if he would help us understand what has changed since 2005, when our colleagues across the aisle made the case that nominees deserve up and down votes, said it was essential in the constitutional vision, was essential in the proper application of advice and consent. What has changed that makes those arguments disappear now in 2013, 8 years later?
And I think you've come back to the central question, and that question is, how does our Constitution work when it comes to nominees? And I don't have any doubt that we're talking about majorities. There are only 5 places in the Constitution where supermajorities are mentioned. It's not mentioned when it deals with advice and consent, dealing with judicial nominees. It's not dealing with presidential nominees to the executive branch. And I think the Republican Policy Committee said it very well in the memo that you're talking about. It was authored at the time. The head of the Policy Committee was John Kyle. He was the chairman of the Policy Committee, very good, known in the Senate as a good lawyer, respected on the Constitution. And he wrote about the Constitution and how the Constitution should work. And he said a couple of things which I think are interesting here. The filibustering senators, this is back in April 25th, 2005, the filibustering senators are trying to create a new Senate precedent, a 60-vote requirement for the confirmation of judges, contrary to the simple majority standard presumed in the Constitution. And then he also says a little bit further, an exercise of the constitutional option. That means taking an action to put a judge on the court with a majority vote. The exercise of the constitutional option under the current circumstances would be an act of restoration, a return to the historic and constitutional confirmation standard of simple majority support for all judicial nominations. And so I don't think anything's changed. I don't think it's changed from Senator Merkley from 2005 to today, and I don't think the Constitution's changed from the time we put it into place till today, that when it comes to these nominees, that the traditions and norms of the Senate are to have majorities have a say and you get an up or down vote. And that's the situation we're in right now. We have a filibuster going on a number of nominees, both presidential nominees, a presidential nominee, and judicial nominees. So all we're trying to do, I think, in working with our leadership is say, let's go back to the norms and traditions of the Senate, where we used a majority wisely and gave that advice and consent.
I thank you for expanding on that picture of the core elements necessary to exercise our constitutional responsibilities. I keep thinking about how polarization in our society has come to bear on this issue. And I believe that there are many colleagues across the aisle who believe very much in what they said in 2005, that there should be up and down votes. And I therefore have to conclude that they have decided that their base demands a permanent campaign against the president and maximum use of every tool available, and that is trumping the appropriate exercise of advice and consent. And perhaps then that polarization explains why the promise made by the minority leader in January to return to the norms and traditions of the U.S. Senate fell apart within weeks, if not days. And perhaps it explains how the understanding that was reached in July to allow up and down votes on executive nominations fell apart a couple weeks ago. And in that situation, then, we have a single path left to us to appropriately exercise advice and consent, and that is to change the rules so that they can't be abused. If the abuse cannot be cured through good-hearted dialogue and understanding of our need to honor the constitutional vision, then we need to change the rule. And that is why I wholeheartedly support moving towards a simple up and down vote. Now, it was in 2005 that our Republican colleagues said if the Democrats keep blocking up and down votes, we're going to change the rules and require a simple majority. And the Gang of 14 came out with a compromise, and they said the compromise was Democrats would only filibuster under extraordinary circumstances, and our Republican colleagues would then not change the rules. But actually, that worked fine in that the Democrats honored that until President Obama came into office, but that extraordinary circumstance wasn't continued to be honored after President Obama came into office. And in that situation, then, it does seem like the only way to make sure we honor the constitutional vision and the balance between powers is to actually change the rules and say it is an up or down vote. I would ask my colleague from New Mexico whether he shares that perspective or perhaps has a different take on it.
Senator Merkley, I don't think there's any doubt in this country that on both sides, the Republican side, Democratic side, the bases push us hard. And I think we've reached this stage of hyperpartisanship. And our job, I believe, as leaders, is to overcome that and to lead. And leading here means allowing the norms and traditions of the Senate to continue, and that would be an up or down vote on judicial nominees. The thing that I asked you at first that was particularly troublesome to me was when you look at the history here, the last two women that were put onto the Supreme Court, Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan, 75% of the Republicans in the Senate voted against both of them. And so you have that history compared with the women that have been denied here. And it's very troubling to me to see that. I don't know, I think we're supposed to wrap up. I don't know if you have any closing comments to do that.
I thank my colleague from New Mexico for his leadership in trying to restore this Senate so it will work on legislation, work on executive nominations, work on judicial nominations. The country has a low opinion of the function of our chamber, and We certainly do not deserve a high opinion when we're captured by this level of partisan paralysis. So I look forward to continuing to work together to help restore this body as a great deliberative body that can fulfill its responsibilities under our Constitution. Thank you, Mr. President.